So recently, Doug Brignole made a couple of videos about me, calling me an idiot, saying my knowledge was in the gutter, that type of thing.
He's clueless about that. It's like he doesn't have a clue. He doesn't even have the common sense to suspect that he doesn't know. This guy is like so far clueless.
He doesn't know shit.
He's literally in the gutter when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to understanding mechanics or physics, literally in the gutter. And yeah, this is why they call it clueless.
There is nothing more frustrating than understanding someone's argument in its entirety, coming to a different conclusion because you have different experiences or because you have additional information, or you are just assessing the information in a different, more complete way, and then them calling you an idiot because you don't understand their argument, when you actually do and you just have a different opinion. First, I want to talk about his comparison of the Sissy squat to a barbell back squat. He compares a 225-pound barbell back squat to a 25-pound Sissy squat. Why those numbers? I have no idea. They seem to be completely arbitrary, and there's no logic presented at all for these numbers. You have Rich Gasperi doing a 25-pound Sissy squat. Do you not think he can use more than 2 plates on the squat? Look at the size of his quads. Why isn't he using more? I'll tell you why. It's because he reversed engineered this situation. He chose these numbers because he wanted to produce a certain result. He wanted to show, hey, barbell back squat produces this much force, Sissy squats produce this much force. Look how much more Sissy squats are. Even more absurdly, if you actually use trigonometry, which is kind of important when you're, analyzing angles and forces, the back squat comes out higher. You wrote a book on the physics of weight training, and we're like, trigonometry? Nah, we don't need that. We can just ignore that.
Nah, it'll be fine.
No, it's frickin' important. And your overly simplistic model of, 45 degrees is halfway from completely upright to horizontal, therefore it's 50%. No, it's wrong, and it's not even close, because that is 71%, just about. 71% versus 50%. You think that's just something to throw away? No, it's important. Next, movement actually happens over time. So you can't just take a snapshot of a certain position of the movement and use this as a calculation to completely represent the movement. Things happen from going in the top of a squat to the bottom of a squat and then back to the top of a squat. In fact, the most difficult part of the range of motion is in the middle of the squat. The bottom part, almost no one fails. Almost everyone can get a rebound out of that bottom position. Even with a pause squat, when you fail, usually you go up a little bit, and then you fail somewhere in the middle part of the range of motion, which you are completely ignoring. For example, some people squat while keeping their knees very forward when they're standing up. This is going to be a lot more quad activation through the middle part of the range of motion. Other people, they tend to good morning their squat. The hips shift back to use more hamstrings, more lower back, more glutes, and less quads. You're just completely ignoring what is happening in that entire part of the range of motion. For example, one of your reasons for not including an incline press and just vilifying this exercise is that when your arms are outstretched, none of the fibers are above the position of the shoulder. Trouble is, this is not an incline press. And if you're incline pressing like this, Lord help you. Generally, when you do a barbell bench press or a decline press or an incline press, you tuck the elbows. Suddenly, hey, look, this stuff is right in the line of pull. And this is backed up by EMG research. In this chart, in this diagram, you have 4 different angles of pressing. Decline, minus 15 degrees, flat, 30 degrees, and 45 degrees. Does there look like a huge difference in terms of activation? No. He makes it sound like the upper chest simply doesn't contribute to an incline press, but that is not correct at all. In fact, in some parts of the range of motion, the incline, the 45-degree incline, is actually the most activated. And at all other parts, it's very, very similar. And sure, for lower chest, incline is not going to be the best by any means, but no one is saying that. They're just saying that for upper chest, incline is a pretty decent movement. I'm not dogmatic here. I suck at squats. I suck at bench press. I do them because they are effective. There are many, many different ways to achieve maximum hypertrophy, not just a small handful of exercises. And if you look at this picture, it shows a woman in the top part of a bench press. Yes, in the top part of a bench press, you're going to be in this position. But when you bench press down, hey, look, suddenly a lot of the upper chest is actually above this position. Next, and this is important, a muscle is not a piece of string.
Muscle fibers are like ropes.
A lot of these models, they just assume that a muscle doesn't actually do anything.
The reason skeletal movement happens is because this rope is pulling its insertion towards its origin.
It's just transferring force. And yeah, if I pull on this side, I pull on this side, the tension is going to be equal throughout every part of, well, this isn't a string, it's an earbud, but it's going to be equal throughout the entire cord. And this is where physics is perfect, assuming you use trigonometry. But biology is very, very messy because you have to take into account that the fiber itself is actually contracting.
Muscle fibers are like ropes.
And this is the difference between tension and load. Tension is what the muscle is actually doing, the force that it's actually producing. Load is the external resistance. So when you do all these physics calculations, you say the load is this much, the joint angles are this much, that is calculating the load, not the tension. Those are not equal unless it's an isometric contraction. But that's not what we're doing, home dog. We're lifting weights, okay? So it's a dynamic contraction. Do you think lifting a weight slowly or quickly has a difference? Yeah, it absolutely does in terms of motor unit recruitment. Lifting quickly requires more motor unit activation. However, this is not encapsulated by a picture with only the bottom position of a squat.
Nah, it'll be fine.
And I think the best way to visualize this is that, again, a muscle is not a piece of string. It is a bunch of units linked together that are all contracting. So it's more like a chain rather than just a piece of string. And let's say you take a few hundred people and you have them all line up and hold hands. They can either be outstretched or they can bring the hands in together. And let's say they're all sitting on a roller wheel that can move, so there's no friction on the ground. If they all contract like this, they all move together and the entire muscle shortens. If they all lengthen, the muscle lengthens. So they all pull together and they all work together, but does that mean that every single person in the line is pulling with the same strength? No. It's like a tug of war. If you have 20 people on one side all pulling together, the sum of their force is the force produced. But not every person is going to be producing equal force, simply because some people are stronger. And there actually is growing evidence for regional, local muscular hypertrophy.
So, let's say like even 5-10 years ago, it was almost mocked if somebody were to say, well, I'm going to work the inner chest, right? And I'm going to, shape the muscle, right? And I think that was more or less established. In the last year or two, I've seen maybe 2 studies now showing where they had squats and they had partials versus full range of motion and variations like that. And it seemed like they actually found differential growth in the distal or proximal.
I've seen those.
Muscle. Do you have thoughts on that?
I've seen those. Look, let me just say, first of all, that we should not take everything as gospel. Mm-hmm. In other words, the first thing I would do is question the results. And the reason I would question the results is because muscle fibers are like ropes.
Nah, it'll be fine.
Okay, not just in terms of EMG. There's a lot of evidence there where, you can actually get more activation of the lower abs or the upper abs, different parts of the chest, obviously, because it's in a fan-like shape. The traps can obviously contract very differently. With the delts, obviously, front delt and rear delt are going to be complete opposites. But even in a muscle like the quads, there's going to be regional EMG differences as well as actual measurable growth. For example, and I'll link this all in the description, An examination of various strap muscles of the human lower extremity reveals a compartmentalization within these muscles. So different parts of the muscle can be innervated differently, and you can actually contract different parts of the muscle, or they're taxed slightly differently by different exercises. And this study concluded the notion that an individual muscle is just a compilation of muscle fibers that traverse from origin to insertion is simplistic and egregiously flawed.
The reason skeletal movement happens is because this rope is pulling its insertion towards its origin.
So Doug, you think that I don't understand your model. You think that I'm stupid. You think that I'm an idiot when actually I'm on a different level of understanding.
Look, let me just say, first of all, that there has to be a rope-like thing happening.
Nah, it'll be fine.
And the idea that part of that rope would somehow work more than another part of that rope sort of defies logic.
And for practical applications, they concluded, I would posit that there is no single best exercise for inducing hypertrophy of specific skeletal muscles. This is part of the reason why bodybuilders use multiple exercises for basically every single muscle group, because it works different parts of the muscles slightly differently. Plus, there is value in variation. For example, even in a very, very simple muscle, like the biceps, they found differences in activation between the short head and the long head that were measurable and significant. But that's not what you said in your book, because you have this very strict physics-based biomechanical model that doesn't actually hold up in the real world. Next, motor unit recruitment. A muscle either contracts or it doesn't contract, a specific fiber, which might run the whole length of the muscle, but might not run the whole length of the muscle, as I just showed. If you're doing a pull-up or a chin-up, even if that is not directly following the fibers, you can still get maximum motor unit activation. Let's say you're doing a chin-up. Just because it's not directly following the fiber, the lats are still the primary way to get shoulder extension. Do you think when you're doing a chin-up and you're near failure and you're grinding through those goddamn reps, do you think your lat will not maximally contract because you're not directly following the fibers? Of course it will. For example, if you're doing a bench press or any kind of pressing movement, depending on the angle, there's going to be one single fiber to rule them all that is directly in the line of pull. The other ones, because it's spread out in a fan-like pattern, will not be exactly in the line of pull. If something is 1 degree off, is it not going to be maximally contracting? No, it still will. If it's 10 degrees off, even if it's not directly in the line of pull, will it be still maximally contracting? Of course it will. Now, if it's completely in the opposite direction, yes, absolutely. That's where following the fibers can make sense. But just because it's not exactly in the same direction doesn't mean it's still not going to be working maximally. You also talk about how when doing compound movements, you might not get 100% activation compared to isolation movements. And this is true. If you're doing a squat, your biceps are not going to grow from that. But why would your quads not grow maximally? The quads are the limiting factor. They are the prime mover, or one of the prime movers, of a squat. If you're standing up from a very difficult, challenging squat, close to failure or with heavy weight, your quads will maximally contract, with the exception of the rectus femoris. But the other ones, why would they not maximally contract? Plus, in a squat, you are also hitting the adductors, which are just as big, potentially, as the hamstrings and are extremely underrated. So the squat is just giving you much more bang for your buck compared to a sissy squat. People might say, Geoff, you're being dogmatic or you're romanticizing these exercises. No, the only thing I'm romanticizing are results. Another area where this biomechanical model breaks down is the mind-muscle connection, which has been shown not just to induce more EMG activity, but to actually influence muscle growth. So you might say, oh, well, based on the physics involved, it's this much force on the muscle. But that's not what the muscle is actually producing. And really what is important is how much the muscle is activating and how much force it's actually producing. In fact, the group that used mind-muscle connection got almost double the growth, 6.9% versus 12.4%, which is a very, very significant difference. Another very, very important factor is individual variation. Not everyone has the same levers, and you can have a picture of a model in the bottom position of a squat, but guess what? Everyone's bottom position of a squat looks way, way different. Sure, you can take the average and use that as a model, but most people aren't average. Some people are, but what does that even mean in the context of a squat? Everyone's squat is going to look and feel a little bit different. And you see some people push their knees way, way forward. Other people push their hips way, way back and keep a fairly vertical shin. This is going to be very, very different in terms of quadricep activation.
Need you to find the differences between this picture and this picture.
Nah, it'll be fine.
And if you ask 100 bodybuilders what their favorite movement is for such and such body part, you're going to get a pretty wide variety of answers. Why? Is it because most of them are idiots and only a few have the right answer? No, it's because there's individual variation and everyone is different. I know that sounds shocking. I know it's very hard to put that into a model, but realize all models are wrong, but some are useful. I'm just saying your models are useful in some cases, but they're overly simplistic to completely explain every part of muscle growth. Next, and this is pretty ridiculous, you said that if you're doing a push down on one side and a curl on the other side, this is not efficient and it kind of confuses your body because you're going in two different directions. That makes sense. I buy that and I would never recommend training like that. But then you extrapolated that to doing lateral raises and pushing on both sides at once and saying that your body is going to get confused because you're going in two different directions. I've never had a client who's like, I don't know, man, like I gotta push left and right, like this seems very confusing to my muscles. No. Cross education cannot be used in that way. That's the idea that if you do exercise on one side, it does carry over to a certain extent to the other side, even if you don't work it at all over the course of weeks or months. But that doesn't mean you can say, oh, if I do the left side and then the right side in a single workout, I'm going to get more gains because I'm working them independently. No. The main issue I had was the fearmongering. The saying, squats are bad, they're dangerous, deadlifts are bad, they're dangerous, bench pressing, overhead pressing, like you're going to impinge your joints, bro. Not necessarily. It's true that some people do get issues with these exercises, but often this is technique related, mobility related. If you're sitting at a desk all day, you might have trouble overhead pressing. That's not the fault of the movement. That's the fault of the individual. If you can't press, don't press. Listen, Doug, I know maybe you snapped your shit up with the basic movements, but that's not the fault of the movement. Either it's technique, or it's volume, or it's recovery, load management, fatigue management. It's not the movement. I know you're on a crusade against these movements. Your entire book was like, spinal loading, spinal loading, spinal loading, spinal loading. I know you've had some injury issues, but that's not the fault of the movements. Actually, if anything, a sissy squat is going to be harder on the knees compared to an effort-equated normal squat. In a squat, you have that co-contraction of the hamstrings, and in the bottom position, you actually do get an unloading effect on the knees because some tension is going to the hips. In the bottom position of a sissy squat, not so much. And if anything, a sissy squat is going to put more stress on the knees. Yes, it's an isolation movement. Yes, it can help you to build muscle. No, for most people, it's not going to be dangerous. But for some people, they might get knee pain, knee inflammation, knee issues, whatever. Not a problem with the movement. It's a problem with how you do it or how you program it. And in your book and on your podcast, you repeatedly say that ego plus squat, bench, deadlift, presses, push presses, Olympic lifting are what cause injury. And often, in many cases, that is true. But is that a problem with the exercises, or is that a problem with the ego-driven, hypermasculine, idiotic behavior? I would say the latter and not the former. If you max out repeatedly on sissy squats using more weight than you should, that will be just as bad as the basic movements. I'm not saying that these exercises are bad, and I'm not saying that you are bad. And in fact, I said you know your stuff. I said the exercises were good. I said your book was good. I recommended your book and I linked your book in a pinned comment. And yes, I was harsh in my original disagreements, which I 100% stand by. The main issues that I had were the fearmongering and the overly dogmatic approach of saying these exercises are the best ones and they are better than every other exercise, supported by a bunch of logic that doesn't really hold up.
Sure. This has been demonstrated in EMG studies. Brad Schoenfeld and Chris Beardsley have both expressed this in research and, acknowledge it. I've seen those. Look, let me just say, first of all, that we should not take everything as gospel. In other words, the first thing I would do is question the results.
And you can call me an idiot if you want. That's your right. That is your freedom to say whatever you want about me. This whole situation wasn't me not understanding your argument. It was simply taking your argument and looking at it not only from a physics and biomechanics point of view, but also a biological point of view. If you don't combine those two, you're going to get a picture that is not quite right, especially if it's only a picture. So I don't have a problem with you, and I still recommend your book. And you should go subscribe to Doug's channel, because he does have some good stuff. Just keep in mind, it's not a perfect model. It has its uses, but it is not perfection by any means. All right, that's all for today. Like, subscribe, share, leave a dislike. I mean, if you want, that's also helps engagement, And I'll see you, maybe, in the next video. Peace.